Sign it, Marcus. It's a temporary management suspension until the safety review is finished.
By Friday. After that, the lender can act.
You're asking my own sister to remove me from managing the house our father left us.
I'm asking her to stop protecting you from consequences. You put cameras in our home. That isn't judgment, Marcus. That's paranoia.
Across the table, Ruth Bell wasn't watching me. She was staring at the old brass key beside Julian's hand.
Where did you get that key?
It's a key.
No. It was my father's.
3 nights earlier, one of my hidden cameras had caught Julian kissing my wife in my kitchen. But after Celeste walked out of frame, he opened my desk, took that exact key, and photographed my father's restoration notebook. I had set up cameras to catch an affair. By that morning, the affair was the smallest thing I was afraid of. Denise picked up the pen. "Marcus, I need time. If you sign that, we may not have any." She signed. Ruth looked at me. "Then Friday is closer than you think." 3 nights earlier, I had thought the worst thing I was going to learn was who my wife was sleeping with. It had started small, the way these things do. Celeste began coming home after 9 p.m. and calling it inventory. She changed the password on her phone and told me it was a work requirement. Then one Thursday she said she was at Hale House late with a wedding coordinator, and I drove past our own driveway on my way back from a lumber yard in the next county and saw her car sitting there under the porch light, cold, with frost already forming on the windshield. I asked her about it the next morning. I asked badly. I said it in the kitchen with my coffee in my hand, in that flat voice I use when I've already decided not to raise my voice. And she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're becoming somebody who checks on me." That should have been the conversation. A better man would have stayed in that kitchen until one of us said something true. Instead, I went out to my truck and sat there with my hands on the wheel, and then I drove to a store 2 towns over and bought 3 small cameras that cost less than a good chisel. I put one in the kitchen, high on the shelf above the cabinets, one in the hallway, one in the corner of my home office, aimed at the desk where I keep my father's papers. That is the first thing I did wrong. I wanted on the record early, because everything that came after grew out of it. For 2 nights, the cameras recorded nothing but a house being quiet. On the 3rd night, at 19 minutes past 10, Celeste came in through the side door and did not turn on the overhead light. She turned on the small lamp instead, the one she uses when she doesn't want the neighbors to know anybody's awake. Julian Cross came in behind her. I had met him twice. He was mid-40s, silver at the temples, the kind of man who says the word community the way other men say the word margin. He had been advising our family for 2 months on what he called the future of the property. I watched him put his hand on my wife's waist in my kitchen. I watched her let him. I watched them kiss the way people kiss when it isn't the first time and isn't a decision anymore. I am not going to pretend I was calm. I sat on the edge of my bed at 2 in the morning with my thumb on the screen and my ears roaring. Then Celeste walked out of the frame, toward the stairs, and Julian did not follow her. He stood in my kitchen for a moment, listening. Then he walked down the hallway, past the second camera, and into my office. He opened the left-hand drawer of my desk, the one that sticks. He knew it stuck, because he lifted it slightly on the runner before he pulled. He took out my father's brass service key on its faded navy cord and put it in his coat pocket. Then he opened my father's restoration notebook, laid it flat under my desk lamp, and photographed page after page with his phone. Slowly, carefully, like a man who had done it before and knew which pages he wanted. When Celeste came back down, he was already in the hallway. The audio is poor, but I have listened to it more times than I can count, and the sentence does not change. Friday still works if he doesn't get into the East Service side. I sat there in the dark of my own bedroom, trying to make those words mean something ordinary. Friday, the East Service side. That is the maintenance corridor at Hale House, the narrow run behind the dining room where my father built his access hatches into the columns. Nobody goes in there but me. Nobody has any reason to. Here's the decision I made at 3 a.m, and I still think it was the right one, even though it cost me. I did not wake my wife up, because the moment I said the word affair out loud, she would know there were cameras. And if she knew there were cameras, Julian would know I had watched him take my father's key. And whatever Friday was, it would quietly become something else, somewhere I couldn't see it. So I lay back down beside her. After a while, she rolled toward me in the dark and said, "You okay?" "Just tired," I said. That was the second thing I did wrong, and it was the one that mattered. I was at Hale House by 7 the next morning. It sits on the north end of the Bellhaven waterfront, brick and timber, 2 stories with a wide covered porch that faces the water. My father spent more than 2 decades bringing it back. When he bought it, the staircase was rotted through, and the dining room ceiling had a sag in it you could see from the street. When he died, brides were booking it 14 months out. I let myself in through the kitchen and went straight to the East Service corridor. It's dark in there, maybe 4 feet wide, lit by 2 bulbs and a window at the far end. The hatches are set into the historic columns, small panels my father cut into the finish so a person could look at the structure underneath without tearing out decorative woodwork. Most people who work in old buildings never think to leave a door for the next man. My father thought about the next man constantly. The third hatch is the one that serves the main dining room support. Somebody had been at it. There was a fresh scrape in the plaster along the top edge, bright and pale against the aged surface. There was white plaster powder on the floor beneath it, not swept, not tracked, just fallen. And the lower screw head was turned to a different angle than the others, which does not happen by itself. I stood there a long time. Then I took the brass key out of my jacket pocket because I had gone back into my own desk before dawn and found it exactly where it had always been, returned overnight like nothing had happened. There was white plaster dust down in the grooves of the bit. That was the first fact I had that was not about my marriage. Julian Cross had used my father's key inside this building, and then he had put it back so I would never know he'd borrowed it. I heard footsteps at the end of the corridor and put the key away. Ruth Bell was standing there with a clipboard under her arm. Late 60s, gray hair cut short, reading glasses on a chain. State preservation structural specialist, retired from field work, still seated on the review panel that had our final determination scheduled. "Marcus," she said, "I'm doing a walkthrough. Nobody told you?" Nobody tells me a lot lately. I could have poured the whole thing out right there. My wife, the footage, the key. I didn't. I asked her one question, and I kept it as small as I could make it. "Ruth, would an old service key matter in a structural inspection?" She looked at me over the glasses for longer than the question deserved. Only if somebody needed to see something that wasn't supposed to be visible from the room, she said. Then she went back to her clipboard, and that was all she gave me. I stood in that corridor and heard my father's voice, clear as a hand on my shoulder. He said it to me the first summer he let me hold a pry bar, when I was 11 years old and certain I could tell good wood from bad by looking at it. Old buildings lie on the surface. The truth is usually behind something. He made me an apprentice before he made me a son with an opinion. 20 years of Saturdays. I know which nails in this building are cut and which are wire. I know which plaster is original and which is my own hand. At 8:30, my phone rang. Celeste. "Where are you?" "At the house." "Then you should know before you hear it from someone else." Her voice was steady and professional, the voice she uses with lenders. The consultant's report came in. They've identified a suspected structural failure in the main dining room support. "Marcus, it's serious. They're recommending emergency closure." The corridor got very small. "Which consultant?" "The independent engineering firm." "Celeste, which consultant?" A pause. "Julian recommended them." "That doesn't make them wrong." I asked her when the inspection had happened. She told me. It was the day before the night on my kitchen camera. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had walked the building with me. I am the co-trustee and the man who has patched every board in the place, and an engineer had come through my father's house, looked at a column I helped rebuild, and written it up as a failure without one question to the only living person who knew what was inside it. If that closure stood, we lost the autumn bookings. If we lost the bookings, we could not make the refinancing timeline. If we could not make the timeline, the lender's review clause opened, and after that, the family stopped being the one deciding anything. Julian called me himself an hour later. He did not sound like a man who had been in my kitchen. "Marcus, I want you to hear this from me. I know things between you and Celeste are difficult." "Do you?" "I do. But this is bigger than your marriage." He said it kindly. That was the worst part. He said it the way you'd say it to a man whose grief was making him unreasonable. And I understood, standing in my father's corridor with a key full of plaster dust in my pocket, that Julian Cross was not afraid of me finding out about the affair. He was afraid of me getting into that wall, which meant he had been planning this before he ever touched my wife. The question changed on me right there. It stopped being, "Who is she seeing?" It became, "How long has this been in motion?" I opened the hatch that afternoon before anyone could tell me not to. The key turned the way it always had. The panel came free with a soft crack of old finish, and I put my light inside. The cavity smelled like cold plaster and time. And there, running up through the column, was exactly what I expected to see. Modern reinforcement. Steel and engineered timber, set clean, sistered to the original members, tight as the day it went in. The consultant's report. I had Celeste forward it to me, and I read it 3 times on my phone, sitting on an overturned bucket in that corridor. Described this location as original, untreated timber in advanced deterioration, never reinforced, never modified. I helped set that reinforcement. I was in my 20s. I remember the heat that August and the way my father wouldn't stop for lunch. I climbed up to the attic office where he kept his papers and found the notebook where he always left it in my desk at home. I had it with me, of course, I had carried it out of the house that morning without knowing why. His handwriting is small and square. The entry was one line, dated the year he finished the dining room. Dining room support rebuilt. Modern insert set. Finish closed after inspection. I went back to the report photographs. There were 2 images of what the caption called the failing support. Old timber, split along the grain, water-stained, ugly. Real deterioration. That wood exists somewhere in this building. I would not swear it doesn't. But it is not in that column. The plaster line in the corner of the photograph was wrong. The nail pattern was wrong. The light was wrong for the west-facing wall it claimed to be. That was the moment the floor moved under me. The consultant had not made a mistake. Somebody had photographed one cavity and labeled it as another. I had my phone in my hand and my thumb over Celeste's name. I wanted to call her so badly my chest hurt. I wanted to say, "I know what he is doing, and I want to hear you tell me you didn't know." I put the phone down, because there was a worse question, and I had been avoiding it for a day and a half. I called my sister instead. Denise lives 4 hours inland. She has a life that has nothing to do with brick and timber, and she picked up the way she always does now, half-braced. "Marcus, I need you to tell me what you've signed." Silence long enough that I heard her set something down. "Celeste called me last month," she said. "She told me your marriage was unstable. She told me you'd stopped sleeping. Then Julian called and walked me through the numbers, and Marcus, the numbers are bad. He said the property has a serious safety exposure, and if that becomes public before there's a plan, the value collapses and we're personally exposed. He offered a route, sell before it goes to pieces." "Did you sign anything?" Another silence. "Preliminary authorization," she said, "for him to conduct a financial review, not a sale, nothing binding." I closed my eyes. A financial review authorization from a co-trustee is not nothing. It is a door. It gave him standing to speak to our lender. It gave him our numbers, our schedules, our vendor list. It made him a person the institution answered when he called. "Denise, you gave a man access to our family's finances and you didn't tell me." And my sister, who I had spent 3 years thinking of as the one who left, said the truest thing anyone said to me that whole week. "You only tell me things after you've decided what I'm allowed to know." I opened my mouth and nothing came out, because she was right. After Dad died, I took the pressure, and I carried it alone. When the roof needed $31,000, I told her it was routine maintenance. When we missed a payment, I told her we were fine. I told myself I was protecting her. I was protecting the version of myself that got to be the one who handled it. "Come to Bellhaven," I said. "Not for me. Come look at the building." "I'm not coming to be managed, Marcus." "I know. Come and I'll show you everything I have, including the parts that make me look bad." She came the next morning. I met her in the parking lot, and I made a decision on the walk in. I did not show her the kiss. I showed her the corridor first, the scrape, the plaster powder, the screw head. I put the key in her hand and let her look at the dust in the grooves herself. I opened the hatch and let her stand there with her own flashlight, looking at steel that the official report said did not exist. I showed her Dad's notebook and the one square line in his handwriting. Then, last, I showed her the clip of Julian opening my desk and taking the key and photographing the pages. She watched it twice. "There's more on that footage," she said. "Isn't there?" "Yes." "Why didn't you lead with it?" "Because it's the part that makes people stop listening to me," I said. "And because it's about my marriage. This is about the house." Denise handed me back my phone, and something in her face shifted about 1/4 of an inch. I have thought about that 1/4 inch a lot since. I think it was the first time in 3 years she had watched me choose to be careful with the truth instead of in charge of it. We sat on the porch afterward with the water flat and gray in front of us, and she told me why she'd been ready to sell. "Dad left this place to both of us," she said. "You know what happened the week after the funeral. You called and told me what you'd already arranged. Not once since then have you asked me a question you didn't already have an answer to. You inherited the responsibility, Marcus, and you started treating it like ownership." I looked out at the water for a while. "You're right about that," I said. She waited. I think she was waiting for the but. I have said the but my whole life. I didn't say it. Celeste came at 4. She was surprised to see Denise, and she covered it well, and she sat down with us at the porch table with her hands folded and made a case that was, honestly, a good one. The report was credible. The closure could be temporary. Panicking would cost us more than cooperating. And Julian, whatever else, had a solution that kept the family out of court. Then she said, "And the offer he structured is well above what a distressed listing would bring." Denise's head came up an inch. "What's the number?" my sister asked. Celeste said it without hesitating. She said it the way you say a figure you have looked at many times. Nobody at that table had said the word sale before she did. Celeste left at 5. Denise watched her car until it was gone and then said quietly, "She had that ready." That evening, Julian sent a letter to all the trustees and copied our lender. It was 3 paragraphs, and there was not one insult in it. He wrote that the managing trustee was emotionally compromised by a personal matter, was resisting an independent engineering finding, and had been acting unilaterally on structural decisions for years without outside review. Every one of those things had a true bone inside it. That is what I want people to understand about Julian Cross. He never had to lie about me. He just had to describe me accurately in the worst possible light and let the institution do the rest. I drove to Ruth Bell's house that night and told her most of it, not the affair. The report, the photographs, the reinforcement, the notebook. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than you'd think. "I remember your father's work," she said finally. "I inspected 2 of his projects in the 90s. He was better than his license." "Then you know that report is wrong." "I believe you," Ruth said. "That is not the same as being able to act." She took off her glasses. "Marcus, memory isn't evidence. A notebook is your father's word and yours. I cannot go to a panel with a dead man's handwriting and a son's certainty. There has to be a physical finding, observed in place by people who have no stake in it." "Then observe it. Come tomorrow." "It has to be inside a proper proceeding, or it means nothing." She put her glasses back on. "Bring me the original notebook and everything you have on that access. If the physical condition contradicts the report in front of the panel, I can ask for the emergency finding to be held." I drove home that night with something dangerous in my chest. Hope. By Tuesday night, I had 4 things, and I laid them out on the desk in my home office and looked at them like a man looks at a hand of cards he's about to bet the farm on. I had footage of Julian Cross taking my father's key out of that desk. I had a notebook in my father's hand describing a reinforcement the official report swore did not exist. I had a sister who had stopped nodding along. And I had Ruth Bell, who had told me what she needed and had not told me it was impossible. Denise called at 9. "I'm not signing a sale until this gets reviewed," she said. "I told Julian that this afternoon." I sat down on the edge of my desk chair. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I told him, "because I don't like being the last person in a room to know something, and I'm starting to think he counted on that." She paused. "Marcus, how bad is the money, actually?" And I told her. All of it. The missed payment 2 years ago, the loan modification, the number we were short, the way I had been covering the shortfall out of my own contracting income since the spring. She was quiet a long time. "I should have told you how bad the money was months ago," I said. "Yes," my sister said. "You should have." She didn't forgive me. She just stayed on the phone another 20 minutes talking about Friday, which is a different thing, and that night, a better one. When we hung up, I did what I always do at the end of a hard day. I put everything important in one place. I have a chest in the corner of my office, navy blue, steel-cornered, that my father used for site tools. I put the original notebook in it. I put the camera hub in it, the little local drive where all 3 cameras wrote their footage, because I had refused to run any of it to the cloud. I did not want a stranger at a server company able to watch my kitchen. I put the brass key on its navy cord on top of the notebook. I closed the lid, and I felt, for about 11 hours, like a man who had gotten ahead of it. My father used to laugh at that chest. You keep everything important in one place because you think order is the same thing as safety. I heard him say it as I turned off the light. I remember hearing it. I remember thinking about it for exactly as long as it takes to walk down a hallway. Then I went to bed. Celeste was not home when I got up. That in itself had stopped meaning anything. I went into the office at 6:30 to load the chest into my truck. The lid was already up. The notebook was gone. The camera hub was gone. The brass key was lying alone in the bottom of an empty chest on its faded navy cord, exactly centered, the way you set something down when you want it found. I stood there for a long moment with my hands on the rim of that chest. There was no backup. There was no copy in a cloud somewhere waiting to save me in the third act. There was one drive in one house because I had decided that privacy mattered more than redundancy, and there was one notebook because it was my father's and originals matter to men like me. I had built my entire case out of objects, and I had stored the objects in the one building my wife had a key to. By 8 o'clock, a city notice was zip-tied to the front gate at Hale House. Emergency safety determination, temporary closure, no unsupervised entry pending review. My name was on the notice as managing trustee, which is a strange thing to be named on the order that locks you out. The emergency trustee meeting was at 10 in the small conference room off the lobby. Celeste got there before I did, and she did the thing I had not prepared for. She told them about the cameras. She did it calmly, and she did it first, before I could put a single fact on the table. She said her husband had installed hidden recording devices in their home. She said she was not going to discuss the state of her marriage in front of the lender. And then she said the sentence that finished me in that room. Whatever he thinks he saw does not make him a structural engineer. She never denied the affair. She didn't have to. She let the affair be the small, sad, private thing, and she made my judgment the public one. And everything I said after that came out of the mouth of a man who spied on his wife. Julian agreed with her, gently. He said he had no interest in anyone's personal life and that the panel's timeline was the only thing in front of them. What happened in the last minutes of that meeting is where this story started. My sister sat with a pen in her hand, and my wife slid a temporary management suspension across the table, and Julian said Friday. And Ruth Bell looked at my father's key on the table beside his hand and asked him where he had gotten it. Denise signed it. She told me later why, and I believe her. The lender had told her that morning that an extension to Friday required demonstrated governance action. If she didn't sign, the review opened that day, and there was no Friday at all. She thought she was buying us 2 days. She was. It cost me every ounce of standing I had left. When the room emptied, Julian gathered his folder and slid the brass key across the table toward me. "Keep it," he said. "It doesn't open anything that matters." He wasn't taunting me. That's what I've come to understand. He genuinely could not conceive that an old key in a carpenter's hand was worth being careful about. To him, it was a piece of family sentiment, and letting me have it back made me look exactly like what his letter said I was, a man clutching his father's keepsake while the adults handled the building. I found Ruth in the parking lot. "I kept the evidence in my house," I told her, "because I still thought I could solve this like a private problem." Ruth looked at me over her glasses. "And is it private?" "Not anymore," I said. She nodded once and got in her car, and I stood in the gravel lot in front of my father's building, suspended, locked out, with nothing left of my case but a key that opened nothing that mattered. I sat in my truck for maybe an hour. The old plan was dead. Not damaged, dead. Every single thing I had been going to do on Friday depended on paper and video, and both were gone. And the only person who could have taken them had married me 11 years ago. Chasing the theft would take months. Friday was in 2 days. So I stopped trying to prove what Julian had done. I started trying to prove what the building was. Here is the thing I had been too close to see. My father did not leave me a notebook. The notebook was a record. My father left me evidence built into the work itself. When a major structural insert goes into a historic building, a real one, engineered, permitted, inspected, the material carries a manufacturer's identification plate. And in restoration work of that era, on a project where the finish was going to be closed over the member permanently, that plate got left inside the cavity, fastened to the insert, sealed behind the finish with the inspection tag. It's a message to whoever opens that wall in 50 years. This is what's holding your building up. This is who made it. This is when. I helped my father set one. I do not remember the serial number. I could not tell you the manufacturer with a gun to my head. I don't need to. I only needed to be there, because a plate fastened inside a sealed cavity behind an unbroken inspection seal cannot have been placed by a man who was locked out of the building this week. And it cannot coexist with a report that says the cavity contains original untreated timber that has never been touched. The building would testify. It just needed somebody with the authority to make it take the stand. That was the problem. I was suspended. I could not walk in there with a flashlight and open a wall. If I did, every image inside that cavity became a photograph taken by a man under a management suspension who had already been accused of acting unilaterally. Julian wouldn't even have to fight it. He'd just have to point at it. I had spent 3 days trying to get around the institution. Now I had to go straight through the middle of it, in front of everyone, with the lights on. I made 3 moves. The first was Ruth. I drove to her house Wednesday evening and asked her to formally recommend a supervised on-site inspection, on the record, on the grounds that the consultant's report and the property's documented restoration history were in direct conflict. "I can request it," she said. "The panel will grant it because the conflict is real. But Marcus, I want a condition, and it isn't negotiable. You do not touch a structural element in that building before the panel is standing in front of it. Not to look, not to confirm. If you go in there alone and open that wall, and it's everything you say it is, I still can't use it. Do you understand what I'm asking?" She was asking me to walk into Friday morning without knowing for certain if I was right. "Yes," I said. The second move was my sister. I drove 4 hours inland Wednesday night and sat in Denise's kitchen and told her about the affair. All of it. The kiss in my kitchen, the timing, the way Julian went into my desk afterward, the sentence about the East Service side. I didn't tell her to hurt Celeste. I told her because Denise needed to understand that the man who had walked her through those numbers so patiently had been in my house at 10 at night, and that his interest in our family's private records had a shape to it. She listened all the way to the end. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to make some bad decisions with good intentions," I said. She got up and stood at her sink with her back to me for a while. "I signed his authorization," she said. "And I signed your suspension." "You did. Are you going to tell me it's fine?" "No," I said, "it isn't fine. It's Wednesday, and Friday is what we have." The third move was the one that cost. Thursday morning, I signed a written declaration for the panel record, stating that I had installed concealed recording devices in my residence, on which dates, in which rooms, and for what reason. I described what the footage had shown. I acknowledged that I had not disclosed it to my wife. My attorney told me not to. He said I was handing them a weapon. I told him they already had the weapon. Celeste had fired it once, and it had emptied the room. If I walked into Friday with that still in someone else's hands, Julian would produce it at the moment of maximum damage, and every fact I offered afterward would arrive attached to the word paranoid. If I brought it myself, first, in writing, on the record, it stopped being a revelation and became a disclosure. It cost me the last piece of privacy I had. It also cost him his best card. Ruth called Thursday afternoon. Supervised final review Friday morning, 9 a.m., on site. Full panel. The lender is sending a representative. And the sale decision? Friday afternoon, she said. 2 o'clock. You have 5 hours between the two, Marcus, and that is all anyone can give you. Thursday was the longest day of my life. Denise came back to Bellhaven. She spent most of the afternoon at the inn with the trustees, and at some point that day she sat in her car in the parking lot and played an old voicemail she had never deleted. I didn't know that. She told me afterward, standing in the dining room, and I have thought since about what it must have been like to sit in a car, listening to a message you had heard as reassurance, and hearing it, that time, as something else. Celeste came to the house Thursday evening to get the rest of her things. We stood in the kitchen, not the office, the kitchen, in the same square of floor where I had watched her let another man put his hand on her. "You think this house stole me from you," she said. "You never asked whether you handed me over to it." I wanted to fight her. I had a whole speech, 3 days old and very sharp. "You're right that I stopped listening," I said instead. "Every conversation we had for 2 years was about that building. I called it responsibility. It was fear, and I made you live inside it. And I never once asked you what you wanted the next 10 years to look like." I made myself hold her eyes. "I failed you as a husband in ways I'm going to be owning for a long time. You still chose to lie to me. Both of those are true, and neither one erases the other." Celeste's face did something I had not seen it do in months. Then she put it away. She picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped. "Julian has a backup plan," she said. "What plan?" "Marcus." "Celeste, what plan?" "I'm not going to say it." Her voice was perfectly level, and her hand was not. "I've done things I have to live with. I'm not going to hand you the last one." She was protecting herself. She had let a man into this house and into records that were not hers to share. And if Julian went down and she had helped push, she went with him. She left. I stood in the kitchen a long time. At 9 that night, Julian made his final move, and it was not a bluff. He notified the trustees and the lender in writing that his investment group would withdraw the bridge financing offer immediately if the Friday inspection did not confirm the consultant's structural finding. That financing was the only thing standing between Hale House and a closure it could not survive. Without it, we were shut for the season, with debt service running and no revenue, and there is no version of that story where a family like ours holds on. He had built it so that being right could still destroy us. I did not sleep. I sat at the dining room table with a legal pad, and I did not write anything on it. I told exactly one person where the reinforcement was and what I expected to find inside that column. Ruth Bell. Not Denise, not my attorney. Because if Julian learned which cavity mattered before 9 a.m., he had a night to do something about it. And I had already learned what happens when I underestimate how much of my house that man has walked through. Friday morning was clear and cold, and the water was the color of nickel. They set the review in the grand dining room, because it's the only room in the building big enough. Long windows on the water side. The restored ceiling my father spent 11 months on. The dining room support column standing at the north end like it had been standing since 1891. The full preservation panel. The lender's representative, a woman with a folder and no expression. The trustees, 2 people from the county paper, a dozen locals from Bellhaven who had eaten Thanksgiving dinners in that room and had heard the building was being condemned. Julian Cross. Celeste in a rose-pink suit, sitting where she could see the door. Denise standing at the back with her arms crossed. Julian spoke first, and he was very good. He said, "Building safety is not a family matter and should not be decided by one." He said the report stood on its own credentials. He said closure protected the public and that a sale, painful as it was, protected a family from a bankruptcy that would take the property anyway. Nothing he said was cruel. When he sat down, half the room was looking at me the way you look at a man whose grief has gotten expensive. Ruth called on me. I stood up, and I did not start with Julian Cross. "Before anything else," I said, "there's something this panel should hear from me and not from anyone else. I installed hidden cameras in my home without telling my wife. I did it because I believed she was having an affair." The room went very still. I was right about the affair. I was wrong to think that being right about one thing made every conclusion I drew afterward automatically true. Somebody in the back shifted in a chair. Celeste did not move at all. "So I'm not asking anybody here to trust my marriage," I said. "I'm asking you to inspect a wall." Ruth wrote something down. Celeste stood. She was calm and she was accurate. She said the condition of the building had nothing to do with the condition of our marriage. She said her husband had spent 3 days trying to convert a personal betrayal into leverage over a professional finding, and that the panel should not let him. Part of that room agreed with her. I watched it happen. I had told the truth about the cameras, and it had bought me a hearing, not a victory, and Julian Cross sat back down in possession of the floor. Then Julian turned to my sister. "Denise," he said, "as co-trustee, do you support proceeding with the sale?" I think he expected it to end there. Denise came forward. "I signed the financial review authorization that gave Mr. Cross access to our family's numbers," she said. "I signed the management suspension that removed my brother 2 days ago. And I did it because I believed Marcus had confused what our father left him with something he owned." She looked at me for a second. Some of that was true. She let it sit. But I have a voicemail on my phone from Mr. Cross. It's dated 11 days before the consultant ever set foot in this building. She played it. The room was quiet enough that we all heard it clearly. "Once Marcus is removed from management, Friday becomes procedural. 11 days before the inspection, before the report, before the finding that supposedly forced the suspension, he already had a Friday, and he already knew I had to be gone before it." Julian did not flinch. "Planning for contingencies is my job," he said. Then evenly to my sister, "Then consider the consulting position withdrawn." Denise had never told me she'd been offered one. She just stepped back to the wall and stayed standing there. Ruth Bell got up. "I'd like the dining room support cavity opened, under my supervision with the panel present." I put my father's brass key into the hatch lock. It didn't turn. The cylinder had been changed. "So much for the magic key," Julian said. 4 days earlier, I would have argued. Instead, I heard my father, screwdriver in his teeth, in that same corridor. A key is for guests. A craftsman always leaves himself a release. He would never build a hatch that could shut out the man who had to maintain it. I ran my fingers under the decorative molding and found the small brass catch behind it. "Ruth, there's a service release. May I open it in front of you?" She looked at it over her glasses. Slowly, the panel came free in my hands. I stepped back and put nothing inside. Ruth's light went in. Steel and engineered timber sistered up the full height of the column and fastened flat against it the manufacturer's identification plate, the inspection seal still lying unbroken across its top edge. She was in there 4 minutes. Nobody spoke. "This reinforcement predates the current report by years," she said. "The report identifies this cavity as original untreated timber in advanced deterioration. It is not. It never has been." Julian moved fast. "Marcus Hale has had unrestricted access to this building for 2 decades. He could have put anything in that wall and closed it up." Ruth didn't defend me. "The preservation seal over the plate has not been broken. This cavity has not been opened and reclosed. That's a physical fact." Julian turned toward the corridor. "Then open the east service cavity, the lower one behind the pantry wall. That's where the deterioration actually is." The room went very quiet. Ruth took off her glasses. "Mr. Cross, how did you know which cavity that photograph came from?" "It's in the report. Not in the version submitted to this panel." Nobody had said those words that morning. Only the man who had stood in front of that wall with a phone in his hand could have. He didn't confess. He turned to my wife. "Celeste, tell them Marcus gave me access to that corridor." That was the backup plan. She stood. She looked at him a long moment. "Marcus never gave him that key," she said. "I did." She sat back down in her rose-pink suit with her name now in a state record, and she did not look at either of us again. Ruth ruled narrowly. The report could not be relied upon. The emergency finding should be withdrawn pending independent assessment, and the misrepresentation would be referred. The lender's representative asked one question: whether the forced sale trigger survived without the safety finding. The panel chair said it did not. Standing there, I finally understood the whole shape of it. The affair was real. But Julian Cross came into my house for the key in my desk, my father's notebook, the access my wife could give him, and a family too divided to compare notes. The man with my wife was only the beginning, because the relationship he wanted was with everything we owned. Hale House reopened 5 weeks later. The independent assessment cleared the column without qualification. We're not rich. The debt is still the debt. The family voted down the sale and brought in an outside financial manager, and I seconded it. Celeste and I are separating. "I'm not going to carry the part of this that's yours," I told her. "Owning my part doesn't require me to carry yours." Denise and I meet the first Monday of every month now with the real numbers on the table. Last month, she asked my permission before signing a vendor contract. "You don't need my permission," I said. "You need my information. That's what I owed you the whole time." On reopening morning, I took the brass key out of my Navy work jacket and hung it on the original service hook my father screwed into that wall himself. "You sure you want to leave it out?" Denise asked. "It belongs to the house." Then I opened the front doors, and the waterfront light came all the way across the lobby to the foot of the staircase. No applause, just a building starting a working day, and a family that still had one. So tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered that the thing you were afraid of wasn't the real danger at all?